Picture the year 1718. Trace your finger along the fractured coastlines of the Caribbean, where humid trade winds dragged the smell of rotting oak, boiling pitch, sea salt, bilge slime, wet hemp rope, sulfurous cannon residue, and fermenting sugar across waters crowded with merchant convoys and prowling privateers. Somewhere between the Windward Passage and the Bahama Channel sailed a pirate captain whose reputation became so monstrous that even hardened sailors who had survived naval bombardments, yellow fever outbreaks, and mutinies whispered his name with visible terror. His real name has been buried beneath contradictory depositions and shattered Admiralty records, but survivors later identified him as Captain Elias Vane, commander of the brigantine Harrow, a vessel measuring approximately 98 feet from stem post to stern gallery, with a beam of 26 feet and a burden exceeding 240 tons. Unlike the towering Spanish galleons with their elaborate stern castles and cumbersome tumble-home hulls, the Harrow had been modified specifically for speed, pursuit, and terror. Her hull futtocks had been reinforced with additional Caribbean hardwood braces cut from lignum vitae trees whose dense resinous grain resisted saltwater rot better than European oak. Her copper sheathing, hammered into overlapping plates nearly 1/4 inch thick, reduced barnacle accumulation and allowed her to outrun most merchantmen during extended pursuits. 12 bronze 6-pounder cannons lined her gun deck, each cast from an alloy containing approximately 88% copper and 10% tin, with trace quantities of zinc and lead that improved flexibility under repeated thermal expansion. During firing, these cannons consumed tightly packed serpentine powder composed of charcoal, sulfur, and potassium nitrate, ground into irregular grains that ignited unevenly yet violently, producing expanding gases that hurled iron round shot through hull planking with catastrophic splintering effects. When a cannonball struck a merchant vessel at close range, the impact rarely killed instantly. Instead, it transformed thick oak boards into clouds of razor-sharp wooden shards that penetrated flesh like shrapnel, severing arteries and embedding splinters deep within lungs and stomach cavities, where infection inevitably followed. Elias Vane understood these mechanics intimately because before piracy, he had reportedly served aboard an English privateer operating under letters of marque during the closing years of the War of the Spanish Succession. He learned navigation, sail handling, naval gunnery, and the bureaucratic hypocrisy of European empires that celebrated violence when profitable and condemned it when uncontrollable. Yet what separated Vane from ordinary pirates was not greed, but appetite. Witnesses repeatedly described how he prolonged suffering not for information, not for discipline, but for entertainment. In the taverns of Nassau, sailors spoke of prisoners suspended upside down from yardarms while their bare feet were slowly lowered toward open lantern flames. Others described mariners tied against capstan posts during tropical storms, while Vane calmly wagered on how long they could survive repeated seawater immersion before drowning. One captured Dutch helmsman later testified before an Admiralty court in Port Royal that Vane possessed the smile of a man watching theater whenever prisoners screamed. The Harrow itself reflected this obsession with domination. Her quarterdeck rails had been reinforced with iron hooks, normally reserved for securing cargo during Atlantic crossings. Yet survivors claimed these hooks were frequently used to suspend prisoners in full view of the crew. The deck planking bore dark stains, where blood repeatedly soaked into the grain despite constant seawater scrubbing. Her articles of agreement promised unusually large shares for ordinary crewmen, sometimes exceeding 1¼ shares compared to the standard single share aboard most pirate vessels, because Vane understood that terror purchased loyalty more effectively than patriotism or ideology. Even so, crew discipline aboard the Harrow bordered on pathological fear. Men accused of theft were not merely whipped with the cat-o'-nine tails whose knotted cords stripped flesh from the spine after 20 lashes. Vane reportedly ordered salt brine poured into open wounds before forcing the victim back to work, climbing ratlines slick with rainwater and tar. One carpenter's mate, who accidentally dropped a boarding axe overboard during heavy seas, allegedly had 2 fingers removed with a sailmaker's knife, while the rest of the crew ate supper in silence nearby. And yet the Harrow continued attracting recruits because the Caribbean in 1718 was a machine built from desperation. Thousands of discharged sailors wandered ports from Tortuga to New Providence, unable to find stable wages after the European wars ended. Merchant captains routinely cheated crews through falsified ledgers and spoiled provisions. Royal Navy discipline often proved equally savage, with flogging severe enough to expose vertebrae. Against this background, piracy appeared not merely criminal but economically rational. A successful raid could provide more silver in 1 month than years aboard a merchant brig. Vane exploited this desperation masterfully, offering plunder, rum, and vengeance, while slowly transforming his vessel into a floating laboratory of cruelty, drifting across the Caribbean trade arteries like a disease carried by wind and current. By late summer of 1718, the Harrow had established hunting grounds near the shipping lanes east of Cuba, where merchant convoys transporting indigo, tobacco, sugar, mahogany, and silver struggled against unpredictable currents and sudden squalls descending from the Atlantic. Vane preferred isolated merchant sloops because their crews disappeared quietly, leaving only drifting wreckage and rumors. The process of attack followed terrifying precision. First, the Harrow approached under false colors, often flying French or Dutch merchant flags stitched from captured sailcloth. Her topsails remained reefed to appear harmless while her gun ports stayed concealed behind painted canvas panels. Only when within pistol range did Vane order the colors struck and the black flag raised above the mizzenmast. Survivors described the moment vividly: the snapping of canvas in humid wind, the metallic groan of pulleys under tension, the sudden appearance of armed figures lining the rails with flintlock pistols tucked into crimson sashes. Flintlock mechanisms of the early 18th century were notoriously unreliable at sea because moisture contaminated priming powder, yet experienced pirates compensated by carrying multiple weapons. Vane reportedly wore 6 pistols across his chest, alongside a curved hanger sword forged from folded steel, imported through illicit Dutch traders. Once boarding began, the Harrow's crew moved with terrifying efficiency, learned through repetition. Grappling hooks attached to hemp cables crashed into enemy rigging, while boarders crossed narrow planks slick with seawater and blood. Merchant crews rarely resisted long because most vessels carried only a handful of light swivel guns designed more for signaling than combat. Yet surrender offered little protection. Vane believed fear itself was a strategic weapon capable of collapsing resistance before battles even began. To cultivate this reputation, he staged punishments as performances. One account from a captured Portuguese sailor thus described how Vane forced prisoners to kneel beside the foremast, while musicians among the pirate crew played fiddles and drums during interrogations. Another survivor claimed Vane ordered a ship's cook slowly lowered into a boiling pitch kettle, used for waterproofing seams during careening operations. Whether exaggerated or not, such stories spread through every tavern and dockyard in the Caribbean until merchant captains began abandoning cargo rather than risk encountering the Harrow. Careening itself formed a critical component of pirate survival. Every few months, Vane anchored in hidden coves along remote islands, where the Harrow was deliberately tilted onto one side using weighted tackles attached to coastal trees. This exposed the submerged hull, so barnacles, seaweed, and shipworms could be scraped away using iron chisels and heated tar brushes. During these operations, crewmen inspected footocks, keel bolts, and planking seams for structural fatigue caused by constant cannon recoil and Atlantic storms. Shipworms posed especially lethal danger because these mollusks bored through timber beneath the waterline, gradually transforming thick hull planks into fragile honeycombs vulnerable to catastrophic flooding. Vane reportedly supervised careening personally, while prisoners labored under armed guard, hauling barrels of pitch heated in iron cauldrons until bubbling black smoke coated the shoreline. Escape attempts ended horribly. One French captive allegedly tried swimming from shore under cover of darkness, only to be dragged back by sharks attracted to blood from earlier punishments dumped into the shallows. Vane ordered the man nailed through both hands onto the Harrow's mainmast, using iron spikes normally reserved for structural repairs. The tropical climate amplified every horror aboard the vessel. Under midday Caribbean sun deck temperatures could exceed 120 degrees Fahrenheit, while stagnant air below deck reeked of sweat, mold, stagnant bilge water, spoiled meat, and untreated wounds. Rats infested food stores, chewing through sacks of hardtack already crawling with weevils. Mosquitoes spread malaria and yellow fever among exhausted crews, sleeping in hammocks, damp with seawater. Medical treatment remained primitive and brutal. Amputations were performed without anesthesia, using bone saws cleaned only in rum or seawater. Infection frequently proved deadlier than combat itself because bacteria flourished within cramped wooden hulls where blood seeped into seams impossible to fully sanitize. Vane appeared fascinated by these realities rather than repulsed by them. Survivors claimed he often visited wounded prisoners not to assist them, but to observe symptoms of infection, dehydration, or delirium with detached curiosity. One account recorded him timing how long a man survived after abdominal wounds exposed intestines contaminated by splinter fragments. Another described him calmly discussing sail trim adjustments, while a captive nearby died from gangrene. These acts gradually destabilized even his own crew. Pirates were violent men accustomed to executions and warfare, but many recognized an important distinction between profitable cruelty and purposeless suffering. Murmurs spread through the lower deck that Vane enjoyed pain more than plunder. Yet fear and greed kept the Harrow functioning as a coherent machine of violence, drifting from convoy to convoy beneath the relentless Caribbean sun. In October 1718, the Harrow intercepted the English merchant Snow Providence, approximately 40 nautical miles north of Hispaniola, during conditions of low visibility created by dense sea fog mixed with lingering smoke from nearby volcanic activity drifting across the Caribbean basin. The Providence displaced roughly 160 tons and carried barrels of molasses, dyed textiles, iron fittings, and 37 passengers, including several families relocating between colonial settlements. Her captain attempted evasive maneuvering by ordering additional sail unfurled, despite strengthening crosswinds. But the Harrow's modified rigging configuration granted superior acceleration. Vane had replaced portions of the original standing rigging with lighter hemp cordage, coated repeatedly in pine tar to reduce water absorption while maintaining tensile strength under heavy strain. As the pirate brigantine closed distance, witnesses aboard the Providence later recalled hearing the creaking resonance of overloaded masts before the first cannon discharge erupted through the fog like thunder. The 6-pound iron shot penetrated the Providence just above the waterline near the forward cargo hold, smashing through nearly 4 inches of oak planking and showering the interior with lethal wooden fragments traveling at tremendous velocity. Within minutes, panic overwhelmed the merchant crew. Women and children hid below deck among cargo crates, while sailors desperately attempted to reload undersized swivel guns incapable of serious resistance. Vane boarded personally, carrying a flintlock pistol with silver inlays and a boarding axe, whose blade edge had reportedly been sharpened so aggressively that tiny fractures appeared along the steel grain. The massacre that followed became infamous even by pirate standards. According to later testimony collected in Kingston, Vane ordered every passenger assembled on deck before selecting individuals randomly for punishment. One sailor accused of concealing silver coins beneath his tongue allegedly had his jaw broken with a belaying pin before being thrown overboard alive. Another prisoner was bound to the windlass, while pirates tightened ropes around his chest until ribs snapped audibly beneath the pressure. Vane forced surviving captives to watch each act, while musicians beat slow rhythms on stolen naval drums. Yet perhaps the most horrifying detail involved the ship's carpenter from the Providence, a middle-aged man named Samuel Reddick, because carpenters possessed valuable technical knowledge concerning hull repair, mast reinforcement, and sail balance. Pirates often spared them. Vane instead reportedly chained Reddick beside the Harrow's forge, where metalworkers heated iron bolts for emergency repairs. Witnesses claimed Vane pressed heated rivets against the carpenter's skin while calmly asking questions about English naval patrol routes. The smell of burned flesh mixed with coal smoke and tar until several pirates themselves vomited over the rails. Even hardened crewmen began avoiding direct eye contact with their captain during these episodes. Maritime culture of the 18th century normalized extraordinary violence, yet Vane crossed invisible boundaries understood instinctively by sailors of every nation. Violence at sea traditionally served practical objectives: enforcing discipline, extracting information, intimidating enemies, or preserving scarce resources aboard fragile vessels isolated from civilization. Vane's cruelty lacked such logic. He extended suffering even when cooperation had already been achieved. This unpredictability transformed him from feared pirate into something almost supernatural within maritime folklore. Rumors spread that the Harrow carried cursed cargo, or that Vane practiced occult rituals learned from African slaves sold through Caribbean ports. Some claimed he collected teeth from victims and stored them inside velvet bags within his cabin. Others insisted screams could still be heard from empty sections of the ship during calm nights. Though likely embellished, these stories reveal how deeply his reputation infected Atlantic shipping culture. Insurance rates for Caribbean voyages reportedly increased in certain ports after reports of the Harrow circulated among merchants. Some captains armed crews with additional muskets and pikes specifically because of Vane's attacks. Muskets of this era used smoothbore barrels typically measuring around 46 inches in length, firing lead balls propelled by coarse black powder that generated enormous smoke clouds after discharge. Accuracy beyond 50 yards remained poor, yet during boarding actions, massed musket volleys could devastate exposed attackers. Vane adapted by ordering his crew to soak cloth strips in seawater and tie them across mouths and noses during assaults, reducing inhalation of smoke particles while preserving visibility slightly longer than defenders choking within enclosed decks. The Harrow's internal organization also evolved toward increasing paranoia. Crew shares were distributed publicly beneath armed guard, while punishments for perceived disloyalty escalated. One gunner accused of hiding captured Spanish coins inside a powder barrel allegedly disappeared overnight. Days later, crewmen discovered fragments of bloody clothing tangled within anchor chains. Whether Vane murdered the man personally remained unclear, but the message spread rapidly through the ship. By winter, the Harrow operated less like a pirate crew and more like an armed cult drifting through Atlantic trade routes under the command of a captain increasingly detached from ordinary human restraint. As 1719 began, the British Empire intensified anti-piracy campaigns throughout the Caribbean, dispatching Royal Navy sloops and colonial militia vessels to suppress the growing pirate republics, threatening imperial commerce. Governors from Jamaica to the Bahamas issued proclamations offering pardons to pirates willing to surrender, while simultaneously placing substantial bounties upon notorious captains. Elias Vane quickly rose near the top of these lists, not merely because of stolen cargo, but because survivor testimony horrified colonial authorities already struggling to maintain order among fragile plantation economies dependent upon uninterrupted maritime trade. The Royal Navy vessel HMS Seaford, a 20-gun sixth rate commanded by Captain Nathaniel Harcourt, received direct orders to locate and destroy the Harrow after reports emerged describing entire merchant crews disappearing without trace. Compared to pirate vessels, naval warships represented floating engineering systems optimized for sustained combat rather than speed alone. The Seaford measured over 110 feet along the gun deck and carried heavier 9-pounder cannons capable of shattering smaller hulls with devastating force. Her disciplined crew drilled constantly in coordinated gunnery procedures involving powder monkeys, transporting cartridge bags from secure magazines lined with copper to reduce spark risk. During battle, these crews could reload and fire broadside volleys approximately every 90 seconds, despite deafening noise, choking smoke, and violent recoil shaking the hull structure. Vane understood direct confrontation against such warships posed enormous danger, so he relied increasingly upon deception and geography. The Caribbean archipelago contained countless reefs, shoals, mangrove channels, and hidden anchorages inaccessible to deeper draft naval vessels. Experienced pirates memorized these waters through years of smuggling and privateering, navigating by stars, prevailing currents, and subtle watercolor changes indicating shallow coral beneath the surface. In March 1719, the Harrow narrowly escaped pursuit near the Cayman Islands after luring a British sloop toward submerged reefs during nighttime fog. According to surviving accounts, Vane extinguished most visible lanterns aboard the Harrow while ordering muffled oars deployed alongside reduced sail. The British pursuer, attempting to maintain visual contact, struck coral at speed. Hull planking split open beneath the waterline, and incoming seawater rapidly flooded lower compartments before pumps could compensate. Vane reportedly anchored nearby solely to observe the sinking from a distance, while trapped sailors screamed in darkness. Yet the psychological deterioration aboard the Harrow accelerated simultaneously. Crewmen lived under constant fear of both naval capture and their own captain. Sleep deprivation became common because Vane frequently ordered sudden nighttime drills or interrogations triggered by imagined conspiracies. Food supplies deteriorated during extended evasive operations. Salted beef barrels often spoiled in tropical heat, despite heavy salting because bacteria penetrated through imperfect seals. Fresh water stored in wooden casks developed algae contamination and foul tastes after weeks at sea. Scurvy symptoms emerged among crew members deprived of citrus, causing swollen gums, joint pain, and bleeding beneath the skin due to vitamin deficiency poorly understood at the time. Rather than alleviate suffering, Vane reportedly interpreted illness as weakness, deserving punishment. One feverish sailor unable to climb rigging fast enough during a storm allegedly received 50 lashes while rain mixed blood across the deck. Storms themselves represented terrifying experiences aboard 18th century sailing vessels. During squalls, the Harrow's masts bent under tremendous wind pressure, while canvas sails cracked like artillery fire. Blocks and pulleys screamed under strain as sailors climbed ratlines, suspended above black waves, capable of smashing men instantly against hull timbers. Lightning illuminated oceans filled with airborne spray and whipping ropes heavy enough to fracture skulls. Vane seemed invigorated by such chaos. Survivors later recalled him standing motionless upon the quarterdeck during storms, coat snapping violently in the wind, while other men struggled desperately merely to survive. His obsession with suffering eventually produced outright resistance among senior crewmen. The Harrow's quartermaster, a Welshman named Rhys Morgan, responsible for distributing plunder and mediating disputes according to pirate custom, reportedly argued that unnecessary torture endangered the crew by provoking harsher naval retaliation. Pirate governance traditionally relied upon surprisingly democratic systems compared to naval hierarchies. Captains held authority during battle, but quartermasters protected crew interests and could challenge reckless decisions. Vane increasingly ignored these conventions. During one confrontation, he allegedly struck Morgan across the face with a pistol butt before threatening to keel-haul him beneath the ship. Keel-hauling involved dragging a bound victim under the vessel's hull from one side to the other, using ropes passed beneath the keel. Victims frequently drowned or suffered horrific lacerations as barnacle-encrusted hull surfaces tore flesh apart. Though evidence suggests Vane never actually performed the punishment upon Morgan, the threat alone shattered remaining trust among officers. Whispers of mutiny spread through the gun deck, while the Harrow drifted deeper into isolation, hunted simultaneously by Imperial warships and the consequences of its captain's madness. The final months of the Harrow unfolded amid growing desperation across the Western Caribbean during hurricane season of 1719, when unstable atmospheric pressure systems generated colossal storms capable of annihilating entire fleets. Merchant shipping decreased temporarily as captains sought sheltered harbors, reducing opportunities for piracy while increasing shortages aboard roaming vessels like the Harrow. Vane responded with escalating brutality, directed both outward and inward. In July, the pirate brig intercepted a Spanish coastal trader carrying medical supplies and church silver near the Yucatan Channel. Survivors later claimed Vane became enraged after discovering the cargo held less gold than expected. He accused the captured captain of deceit and ordered a grotesque punishment using the ship's own navigation instruments. Brass dividers heated over open flame were reportedly driven into the prisoner's shoulders, while Vane demanded non-existent treasure locations. Maritime navigation during this era relied upon fragile combinations of dead reckoning, compass bearings, sand glasses, celestial observation, and increasingly sophisticated instruments such as octants and cross staffs. Skilled navigators represented invaluable assets because inaccurate calculations could doom entire crews upon reefs or open ocean starvation. Destroying such instruments